Hi, my name's Wasim and I'm a delivery manager. I decided to start making weekly notes, and this is the first of hopefully many posts to record my weekly notes. Essentially, what I've done on a daily basis over the past week. And the idea is that it will A, remind me to reflect on what I've done, and B, provide an opportunity for other people to get an idea of what the day-to-day life of a delivery manager looks like. Now, I'm using the term delivery manager because that's what we call a scrum master in my organization. It's essentially the same role with a couple of differences. And a couple of reasons why we say delivery manager and not scrum master. Not important right now, but it's something I'll cover in later posts. If you're thinking about becoming a scrum master, then I think you'll find this podcast interesting. If you're already a scrum master in a different organization and you want to see what other scrum masters are doing in other organizations, then again, this will be an interesting podcast for you. If you just like to listen to the sound of my voice, then this is again a good podcast for you. Let's have a reflect back on the week. So Monday, I ran a volunteer recruitment session. One of the other delivery managers was supposed to have co-hosted this session. However, it turned out she had to go on annual leave on the day it was set. And I said, you know what, I can jump in. And the person she was going to co-host with would still be there. So I met with her the week previously, and we planned what we wanted the session to look like. Now, this person wasn't a delivery manager, so I was able to jump in with my delivery experience to complement the questions that she had and the information that she wanted to get out of people. Being guided by her on content, I created a mural, which is a tool, an online tool, to facilitate that process and just to make it easier for people to provide information. What does easier mean? Well, the flow of the session has to be right. When I run a session, I want to create a path for people to walk through. The best possible path where they will be the most satisfied and I'll get the most information. We ran the session together and it was really interesting. Well, what was actually interesting was that we expected, based on sign-ups, maybe around 10, maybe 15 people to turn up. Then actually 55 people turned up. So that was interesting. First of all, just scaling up that planning on the mural from 15 to 55 was interesting. And that's I suppose the kind of thing you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Luckily, my background as an educator, being in front of a class of 30 teenagers or providing training to a group of staff, if something goes wrong or something like the internet goes down or something else happens, you have to improvise. So my background as an educator came in handy there, and I was able to scale up the operation so we could effectively deal with 55 people. The session went well, both subjectively and objectively. Objectively, we got some positive feedback on the day about how people had really enjoyed the session, and I'm expecting more detailed feedback as well following the return of a survey sent out post-session. And this was one of those sessions, one of those one-off sessions, which is quite interesting to me as a delivery manager, as I was essentially going in blind in a lot of ways, in terms of not knowing who the people were, and the co-host as well hadn't met a lot of the people who were going to turn up either. So it was interesting just to go in blind, and that's the kind of thing you might be expected to do as a delivery manager. And that's the kind of thing you have to be flexible on. You can plan as much as you want, but in the session sometimes you have to change things, move things around to make it work best for the outcomes that you want. Later in the week, I met another team, an external team that we're working with. So my team is working on a fairly large project at the moment, and I met up with an external team who we're coordinating with as part of this project. One of the things we're coordinating on is pen testing. Pen testing, if you're unfamiliar with the term, penetration testing, is looking at a system and seeing where we can find vulnerabilities. So essentially, you hire someone to have a look at your system, figure out what the issues are, where the potential security issues are, and because we complete this as because we were completing part of the system and they're completing the other part, what we need is a whole system to be completed and integrated before we can commence with the pen testing. And that's what this session was about, just to help me as a lead for my team and for the other team's lead to understand where we are in terms of progress towards that final goal, and to make sure we coordinate over the next few months to make sure we're both ready at the right time for pen testing. What you don't want to do is book the pen testing and then have to move it for a number of reasons. One of which is the company that does the pen testing will want 10 working days to change it, and they're busy, so you might end up waiting a while for the rebook. So what you want to do is you want to set the date when you're fairly certain, and that's the kind of thing we discussed. We haven't established the exact date yet, but we know that there's a few things that we need to put in place before we can establish that date. Now, within the area that I work in, there's two teams. So I'm responsible for one team, and we also have another team that works on something slightly different. So both teams have their remits, and we both look at certain things. And the interesting thing came up last week where someone brought up something that they wanted to update. Now, it was actually a design system component, and it didn't really fit into the work my team were doing, and it didn't really fit into the work the other team were doing either. And that was really interesting because that situation hadn't come up a lot or at all in the past. And it got me thinking about actually whose backlog should that go into. We don't have at the moment a product person in a team. So normally your product manager is the person who will prioritize the items and fit them in the workflow. And we don't have one of those, and we don't really have a process to deal with those extra items. So that was interesting. It wasn't a massively urgent item, but here's the interesting thing about it. While it seemed like a fairly innocent item, we just need a minor change to the design system. On the face of it, it seemed fairly straightforward. Speaking to the developers about it though, some questions arise. If the design system changes, it's not going to affect just future designs, it's going to retrospectively affect every design on the site. So then you've gone from making a minor change to something which seems like something simple to something now which is much larger. This is the question in my mind: who deals with this? How does it fit into the backlog? And now the question: what are the further ramifications of this item? What seemed like potentially a couple hours of work might actually lead to further issues and become a massive time sink, which takes us away from the deadlines we're working towards. Like I said, it wasn't an urgent issue, and we're actually getting a product person in next week, so I'm going to leave it on the back burner. It's on my mind, but I don't have to bring it in right now. I'm going to bring it in with a product person to discuss when we discuss prioritization. We actually have to run the prioritization session anyway. I ran a road mapping session last month where we did some basic road mapping of what we need to do now, next, and later. Next, I'll run this prioritization session so I can bring in this design system element into that. Just food for thought though, in terms of how something which appears simple all of a sudden can become massive. Then you have some regular things, like every 2 weeks we have a demo, which means that every 2 weeks I've got to determine what to demo. The team isn't always, I'm not going to say that they're not keen to volunteer, but they're not always forthcoming, and that's probably because they're all a very modest team, and the amazing work they do is all day-to-day work for them. So they're probably thinking, this is my day-to-day work, but it's actually fantastic, amazing work, and I really want to highlight that to the greater organization, and that's what the demo does. Getting people to volunteer for them though, this is sometimes a bit difficult. So every 2 weeks there's a demo, which means that every 2 weeks, the alternating week that is, I look at the jury board, see what work has been done and what work is being close to being done, and I generally prompt those people and say, look, you've almost finished, or you finished this, it would be great to demo. And most of the time people are happy to sort of jump in and demo. People just occasionally need a couple of days of warning before jumping in, which is reasonable. What I've tried to emphasize is that it's a demo. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just something which essentially shows what they've done. It doesn't have to be a refined product, it doesn't have to be finished, it doesn't have to include a presentation. If they don't want, they can just talk through it. So I've been working on removing that barrier to delivering a demo or participating in a demo. So previously, the barrier in people's mind was, I've got to have the item finished, I've got to have a nice presentation, I've got to practice it. We even at one point, I think, floated the idea of practicing it within the daily, but we've come away from all that. I've guided the team away from that to make sure what we're actually looking at is simply the demo, not a presentation. Now, every month I create a delivery metrics report. This is a fairly detailed report on what's been going on within the team. Now, there's a number of teams, and all these reports gets collated and passed on to the delivery leads for their meeting. So every month, what I do is I run through and update everything on the report from the previous month. There's things like the health check. So I run a team health check every month. A quick survey goes out to the team about how they feel about general working, well-being, etc., etc. I also include a few other metrics like cycle time, work in progress, slow cards, all of which have really interesting elements about them. They probably could be totally separate podcasts that could discuss these delivery metrics and the benefits and drawbacks to these. Really, I think the overall guidance would be that no single metric stands alone. And really, if you want to review your team, then you want to be looking at all metrics at the same time. Just as a quick example on this, if you look at cycle time and you think, okay, this month, my cycle time has increased. Oh no, that's bad. Or this month, my cycle time has decreased. Oh, fantastic, that's good. But actually, without the context of something like work in progress, as in how many cards do I see that are on the board at the same time in progress, the cycle time is meaningless. If the number of cards in progress has increased, perhaps because you split the cards up more, which has meant that you've got more cards in progress. Now those cards, because they split up more, will complete faster, so your cycle time is decreased. So you see it links together. But if your work in progress hasn't increased, but your cycle time has increased, then what's the issue there? So like I said, this could be a separate podcast, and potentially I might do a separate video on this later on at some point. The report also contains risks. So now I've got a risk register, a risk rating register, and I make sure in the week before the report is due, I get the team together and we have a look at the risks and decide what we want to highlight to the delivery leads, because there are certain risks that we want to keep within the team, certain risks which need to be escalated. The decision as to which is made by the leads, by us leads as a group, and so I run through the risk register, update that, and copy over the relevant risks to the delivery metrics report. There's also a bunch of product pages on there which the product person fills out. At the moment we don't have a product person, so we just sort of fill it out as a team, and that's completed every month. What I've been trying to do is think about ways in which I can share this with the team, more certain aspects of it, as there's certain bits of risk ratings that are going to be team specific and individual specific. So generally I wouldn't want to share the risk slides, but the other areas I would share. So the team health, have a discussion on team health, delivery metrics, have that discussion on cycle time, etc, etc. So what I'm trying to do is finding ways of sharing that. At the moment probably unsuccessfully, but moving forward I want to try to integrate that into my weekly routine, in which I share the report and get people's feedback on it, see what we can do as a team to make us more effective. Another meeting I had, I caught up with our product design person and a content designer. We had a look at a form that's being built, and we're quite far along on the build of this form. So with this form, 3 of the options lead down one path, and 1 of the options leads down a separate path. Now with the 3 of the options leading down that one path, down that one series of forms, it's a multi-stage form. The wording for that path becomes a little tricky. Because those 3 options, even though they're essentially the same thing, they're coming at the option from different viewpoints. So the viewpoint of the person, the viewpoint of someone who's helping that person and to fill the form out, and again the viewpoint of somebody else. So the issue has become with the pronouns in use. For example, should the form state what is your email, or should it ask what is the person's email? Right? So on that page, what would you write? Would you write what is your email, or would you write what is the person's email? Now the content designer suggested, oh, can we not just split up the form? And I suppose my first thought was that sounds like a lot of work for what seems like we could just word it in a slightly different way. But I held back and I asked the question, how easy would it be to just do that? Would it be difficult? In my mind I had to fight not to say just change the wording, because it's an update to a current form, and the live form has wording which is fairly vague. It's not ideal, but it does the job. The other option of trying to update the form we're developing, which has been programmed, seemed like a massive amount of work, especially since we're on a timeline, but I fought against that initial impulse, because I didn't want to make that assumption that it would be a big job. I'm not a developer. Okay, so I studied computer science and I know how to program, but I'm not a developer, and I'm not a developer on this project. So I took this to the developers, and actually it turns out it's not that difficult to make the split, as the content designer wanted. So that was definitely the right call. I'm quite happy with that. And I noted my own development there after some sessions. I feel like I've come along, and this was one of them. Some sessions I feel like I've got a lot further to go. And those are the main highlights of last week. Sort of things I was thinking about. Obviously there's a lot more day-to-day stuff going on, a lot more things happening, but overall in terms of highlights and the thinking that went on, that's the week ahead. I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, tune in again for another weekly roundup, same time next week. Thank you for listening.